Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. Idaho Matters is taking a deep dive into the loss of farmland here in the Gem State. Are you a farmer? What challenges do you face as farmland shrinks in Idaho? We want to hear your story. Email us at idahomatters@boisestate.edu or leave us a voicemail using the Talk to Us feature in the Boise State Public Radio app. And then listen to our series on farming called Land and Legacy. Episodes available on Monday afternoons in the Idaho Matters podcast feed. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Idaho's debate over education funding is heating up, but some say the conversation is being framed the wrong way. Supporters of our state's new education tax credit law say public schools will remain the backbone of our state system while giving families more options and flexibility. However, as you heard last week on Idaho Matters, critics of that new law, which is set to take effect in January, warn that funding alternatives could undermine public education. And they've filed a lawsuit with the state Supreme Court saying the new law is unconstitutional. So as we wait to see how the justices decide how far the state can go when it comes to expanding education choice, we wanted to talk with supporters of this new law. Chris Cargill is the president of the Mountain States Policy Center, and he's joining us now to talk more. Chris, nice to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be with you again.
So, Chris, supporters say that Idaho doesn't have to choose between public schools and education choice, that they can both coexist. In your opinion, what does that look like in practice?
Sure. I think it looks like exactly what's going on in many other states at the moment, where not only does an education choice system complement a public school system, but it also provides for increased outcomes in both the public school system and folks who and children who may not participate in the public school system. And I think that's what's important to point out here. The education choice tax credit, as you know, is $50 million. That represents less than 0.0185% of what we allocate to K through 12 public schools in Idaho, and what we allocate to K through 12 public schools is not going away. All this does is provide another option for families out there who may not, they may have a child that doesn't necessarily fit into the public school box, and that's okay. I mean, that's not an indictment of public schools at all. It's a realization, I think, that every child is different, and we want to make sure that we're giving parents as many options as possible.
So, Chris, why do you think this new tax credit is the right step for Idaho families right now?
Well, it may not be the right step for all Idaho families, and I think that's the point, Gemma. I mean, we want to make sure that families have multiple options out there available. Again, for the majority of families, the public schools working just fine, and it works well for them, and they're pleased with it. They know their neighborhood, they know Mrs. Smith, they know Mr. Johnson at the local school, and they're just fine with that. What we're talking about here is providing another option for that remaining 5 to 10% of kids who may not necessarily do well in that typical public school setting. And so it may not be the right choice for every single family, and that's okay. That's exactly what we're trying to say here, is that we need all of these options available so that families can choose. We've never seen a situation in life before, at least I haven't, where providing someone with more options leads to a negative outcome. Usually what ends up happening is you provide a family with more options, you're going to see better results, and that's what we believe will happen with this education choice tax credit.
So you've described this as a way to really put families first. So what specific problems does this law solve that the current system doesn't?
Well, I don't know if I would say it solves any problems. What I would say is it gives people more opportunities. And so again, if you're a family who perhaps has a child in the local school that is struggling in that school, either they're facing bullying or something else is going on in the school, and you just believe as a parent he or she would be better off in a different setting, this gives you the option to be able to do that. If we don't have this particular law in place, you are basically stuck. It's essentially like saying you can have any new car you want as long as it's a red Ford. What we're trying to do here is make it so that all families can choose from a bunch of different options available. Look, I have a special needs son, and he, of course, did not do very well in the public school setting. We were actually able to set him up with it with an online school. My other son did just fine in the public school setting. So every child is different. No two children are exactly the same, Gem, and I think that's what's really important. And the bottom line is this: do we trust families in our state to make those decisions? And I
Mhm.
think if the answer is yes, we do trust families, then of course the answer is we need to provide them with as many options as possible.
So, Chris, some of people's concerns have to do with transparency. So, how does the state ensure transparency and accountability for taxpayer dollars that are being used in private or alternative education programs?
So I think that's a great question. And look, I think it's a question we have to be asking of the entire K through 12 education atmosphere, if you will. We want to make sure that there's transparency at the public school. We want to make sure that there's transparency in the charter schools and magnet schools. But I would just argue that the best transparency you can have is the ability of a parent to choose something else. If a parent doesn't like what's going on at his or her local school, whether it be a private or a public school, their ability to walk away and go to a different school is paramount. And that is what this provides, Gemma. And I listened to the conversations that happened on the program last week and before, and I know there's a
Hmm.
lot of hyperbolic language out there about vouchers and about defunding schools. A, this is not a voucher. B, it has nothing whatsoever to do with the K through 12 public school budget. And if you look at some of the other states that have dealt with this exact issue, what the Supreme Court in each of those states has said is that there's no reason the legislature can't do both things. That is, provide a thorough public school system and also supplement education choice on the side.
Hmm. Well, you know very well that public schools are required to meet certain academic and reporting standards. Private schools are not. So, in your opinion, should schools that benefit from this tax credit have to be held to that same standard?
Well, I think there's a problem with that particular argument, and that is that schools are not benefiting from this tax credit, and that's the key point here, is that this money does not go to the local private school. This money does not go to such and such Catholic school or this other Christian school or a different private school. It goes to the family. The family may decide to spend it on homeschooling expenses. The family may decide to spend it on tutoring or other educational options. Or yes, they may decide to spend some dollars on a local private school tuition. But it goes to the family. And I think if we're going to make the argument that we have to know exactly what's happening with all of those specific dollars, you risk upending the state's entire tax credit structure. You could make that same argument, by the way, with the state's grocery tax. We don't know for sure if a family is spending that grocery tax rebate, for example, at the local Albertsons or Fred Meyer or where they're spending it. We are giving the option to families in this case to do what's best for their child. And so I think it's really a key point that this money does not go to private schools. It goes to families in our state.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that this doesn't go to the private schools. However, if the families take this tax credit and they pay tuition to the private school, how is the money not going to the private school?
Well, and that's the difference between a voucher and a tax credit, is that a voucher would be money sent directly from the state to a private school on behalf of so and so family, whereas a tax
Mhm,
credit is sent directly to the family, and the family decides where they're going to spend those dollars. And so again, the if you read the bill says very specifically, yes, it could be spent on a family's tuition bill. There are very
mhm.
few public or private schools in the state that have the exact dollar amount that's allocated in this particular bill per family. But yes, it could be spent on their tuition, but it is also just as likely to be spent on a tutoring program or homeschooling expenses or other educational expenses. Again, we're trusting families here. That's what it's all about, trusting families to give them the options that they need to make the best decision for their kids. We're not saying that the legislature knows best. We're not saying that the state bureaucrats know best. What we're doing with this particular bill and this particular idea is trusting families to make those decisions.
Mhm. So if there's no money going anywhere, then why is there $50 million allocated?
So I mean, there is money allocated in the budget, correct, because it is a tax credit. And so again, the money goes to the family. And that's the point, is that it does not go to a private school. It goes to
But
the
it does
family,
if
and the
they pay
family
to, but I'm
decides.
just, but it does if they're, I mean, the family is getting some type of taxpayer dollar benefit to put that tuition towards private school. Am I not understanding this correctly?
No, you are understanding it 100% correctly. That may be a benefit that they decide to use with those dollars. But it's just as likely that they may decide not to use that benefit as well. They may decide to use it on other expenses that I mentioned. So I don't think you can say, well, this money is going to private schools when we don't know for sure that is exactly what's going to happen with every single family that takes advantage of the program.
Okay. So how does this law then help families, Chris, in rural areas? Because we know that access to private schools in particular, but even charter schools, are really limited in the state of Idaho. I mean, I believe there's at least 21 counties in our state that the only option outside of homeschooling or maybe doing something online is public schools. So how does this benefit families in our rural areas?
So I think it's a great question, and I think what you've seen happen in some of the other states is when they've adopted a program like this, they have seen an increase in the amount of options in those rural communities. And so Florida is one example, Arkansas is another example. They had just as a very similar type setup where there was a lot of concern at the very beginning of the program that some rural communities might not have enough options for families. And what I will tell you, and what the research has shown us, is that what's happened is once you start providing these options, rural options start showing up. And that's the great thing about it, Gemma, is that we have the ability now to be very innovative in how we advance education. Um, uh, Education advancements for kids throughout the
Mhm.
state. You may see a new magnet school or a new type of private school or a specialty school open up in certain areas now that we're giving families more options. And the reason why I say you may see that is because that's exactly what's happened in many of these other states. So I look forward to the innovation that's going to be part of this bill, and how excited I've had several folks come up to me and say they're really excited about starting their own micro school in an area of town or in a certain rural community because they would like to be able to provide more options for families there. So I think the innovation is probably the hidden part of this story that you're going to see much more of here in the coming years.
So do you see this as primarily helping low income and middle income families, or will higher income families benefit the most? And I ask this question because we've seen that also play out in states like Arizona. And just anecdotally, I mean, my children go to private school. I made that choice 13 years ago. I've been paying tuition for 13 years. That is the choice that my husband and I made. Um, this tax credit doesn't even come close as even what you said about the cost of tuition at private schools. So
Yeah,
how
and
does this help low and middle income families versus higher income families who have already been making this choice?
so again, another great question, and the bill is very specific in that it will give priority to folks who are at 133% of the federal poverty level. So I think it's important to point that out, that priority is given to lower income families. What we've typically seen in the other states, and Arizona is a good example, Indiana is another example as well. The average family income of a family taking part in a program like this in Arizona, it's 62,000 per year. In Indiana, it's 83,000 per year. And so those are not necessarily real high income families. Those are middle income
Mhm.
folks who are looking for more options. And you're right, Gemma. It's not necessarily going to cover everything. It's not going to cover 100% of sending your child to a different educational option. I don't think it was ever intended to do that. What it is intended to do is make it easier for you to be able to make that decision. And so I'm really excited that you have been able to make that decision. I hope other families in Idaho will also be able to make that decision as well. And this particular tax credit program gives them a little more flexibility, a little more breathing room to be able to say, you know what, I would like to be able to make that decision for my child as well.
I have a couple of minutes left with you, Chris, and I really want to hit on this lawsuit that's going in front of the Idaho Supreme Court. And as you know, we spoke with some of the folks who brought that lawsuit last week and got their thoughts on it. And the Idaho Constitution does require, and I'm quoting from the Constitution, a uniform and thorough public education system. So, how, in your opinion, does this new law align with that mandate?
Well, absolutely. I mean, first of all, that's one of the key claims. But I think it's important to point out that the state's constitution says, and I'm reading from it here: the stability of a republican form of government, depending mainly upon the intelligence of the people, it shall be the duty and legislate of the state of Idaho, the legislature of the state of Idaho, to establish and maintain a general, uniform, and thorough system of public, free, common schools. Period. That's fine. That's exactly what the state has done. And in fact, the legislature has increased the amount of funding going to K through 12 public schools. That is supposed to be, that is intended to be the floor. That is not intended to be the ceiling. And so it's important to keep that in mind when we're having this discussion, because again, this is what has happened. And these are the arguments that have been made in other states. There's a lot of misconception out there that what that means is that we can't have anything else on top of that. And I think what's important to point out is that if you are going to make that argument, again, it puts in jeopardy a whole host of other things that are part of the state's K through 12 environment as well. The West Virginia Supreme Court, as I mentioned earlier, came
Hmm.
out with a ruling on this and basically said the Constitution allows the legislature to do both of these things. And I think that's what's important to remember in this case.
Well, Chris, I really want to thank you so much for taking time to talk to us and giving us this view and perspective of the new law. So, thanks for taking time today.
Absolutely.
We've been speaking with Chris Cargill. He is the president of the Mountain States Policy Center. We've been discussing Idaho's new school tax credit law that is set to take effect in January. Now, there is currently a lawsuit in front of the Idaho Supreme Court that is seeking to stop the implementation of that new law. And of course, we will keep you updated on it as it moves through the court. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.